Everyone. This is a joint workshop between the Somersworth School Board and the Somersworth City Council, sort of an annual rite of passage as we enter into the budget season. It allows the school department and the school board to sort of share some initial insights on their budget, and then allows the City Council to offer some very initial and preliminary thoughts on where they might stand with regard to some budget numbers, knowing full well that the stage we're at right now is the school department sends its budget request to the city manager. He will then prepare the overall city budget with the school department budget bottom line included as part of that, that the city council will then begin discussing sometime after March 15th. Typically, the council has acted on the budget sometime during the month of April, but by city charter has up until the end of June to actually make a decision on the budget. I've been on the council now working on, I think, 15 years. We've never gone that long, but the charter does allow for that. And if the council does not adopt a budget by June, the end of June, the city manager's proposed budget is the default budget. So if the council chose not to act, which can't imagine that would ever happen, but city manager's proposed budget would be the adopted budget. We do have a tax cap here in the city of Somersworth, which impacts our level of spending from a year-to-year basis. Those numbers are out. That was important for the school department as it prepared its initial budget request. And the purpose of this meeting, again, is to have sort of a open dialogue as to sort of the pulse of the council, the request of the school department and the school board to see where we might have some commonality or where we might have some separation. I know there's a lot of new faces in the room, at least to me, and I think it would be helpful to those watching if we could pass the mic around just what it is that you do, what you do on that board, maybe how long you've been on it, any other general comments you might have, and then we'll get going in a more formal way.
Sounds great. Thank you. Maggie Larson, Somersworth School Board Chair, 8 years. Okay.
Hello, Kat Crosby, Assistant Superintendent, first year.
Robert Gibson, Ward 3, previously served on the school board for 14 years.
Katie Kraus, Business Administrator. Are we supposed to say how many years? 23.
Crystal D. St. Croix, School Board at Large, second year.
Carrie Clark, School Board at Large, Vice Chair. Is that what it's called? I don't even know. Forever, I think I've been here. No, 4 years, I think.
Sarah O'Brien Hart, School Board at Large, second year.
I'm Carly Prescott. I represent Ward 5 on the school board, and it's my first year. First month.
Crystal Parody-Catanzaro, City Council Ward 4, first year of second term, so 3 years total.
Paul Goodwin, City Councilor at Large, in my second year of my first term.
Ethan Clark, resident.
Bob Belmore, City Manager.
Ken Vincent, Ward 2 Councilor.
Marty Pepin, Ward 1 City Council.
Nancy Cameron, City Councilor at Large, fifth term.
John Shea, Superintendent of Schools, 7 months.
Rick Michaud, Ward 5 City Councilor in my 8th year.
And again, Dave Witham, I'm the deputy mayor, as I said, about 15 years on the city council, lifelong resident. So at this point, I'll turn it over to the chair of the school board if she wants to offer some preliminary information about the budget.
Sure. Thank you. Yep. 8 times around doesn't get any easier except for COVID, which was not easy. We just didn't have to make as many drastic cuts that we continuously have made throughout the years. I am in the board. I'll just say that this year especially is such a tough year, especially I'll focus on our special ed funding from the state and federal. We as a collective board and city councilors, thank you for your support to support special ed reimbursements and coverage for our roughly 30% of our students that are identified as special education with those needs. So we are again, looking at some pretty significant cuts where we cannot make any, not maintaining the status quo again. Here we are trying to just maintain what we had this year, and we're not able to do that largely because of funding. The large majority is on my neighbors and taxpayers. However, nothing's been resolved as of yet, but as one board member, I'm going to fight and advocate for that, especially in special education where we see our greatest needs, and it's a heavier price tag for specific services and transportation. Other than that, I'm just looking forward to hear people's thoughts and insights, solutions, and all that. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. Katie, is it possible for you just to kind of go over where you're seeing the biggest reductions, or John? Sure.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to do a quick overview, and Katie will give you a little bit more details. Bottom line is, based on the numbers we have at this time, projected expenditures, projected revenues, and looking at next year, to do next year exactly what we're doing this year. And I'm not a Somersworth resident or taxpayer. I always want to be clear about that. But as your superintendent, I have an ethical, moral, professional responsibility to just kind of tell you where we are and what we need. And I know part of that is presenting a budget that meets the tax cap requirements. And I think part of that has to be, but this is what we need. And we're working on a significant plan to kind of think about where we're headed in the future. So we'll have more details on that the next budget season. But for this budget season, just to be clear, to do next year precisely what we're doing this year, which as your superintendent I will tell you is not enough, is going to cost about $2 million more. That's about a 6% increase over this year. That's collective bargaining agreement commitments. That's health insurance increases. That's things that are hitting a lot of schools everywhere. Required special education needs. And I know other districts are going to be looking at numbers closer to 10%, and I know 6% is hard. I know that's hard given where we've been. But based on current revenues and expenditures, it looks like we're going to be well over $1 million short in getting there, closer to maybe 1.3 million. So that's positions, that's possibly a CTC program. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. But that's the bottom line of where we are and what we want to have you understand this evening. The second thing I want to add is I've been in education since 1992, and recessions, the pandemic, all kinds of ups and downs and budget cuts, and you're always fighting for schools and you're fighting for everything about them. And there was a lot of energy about redesigning schools in the 90s and into the first 10 years or so of this century that basically fizzled out with the Great Recession. Things got political. We went into COVID. We argued about books and bathrooms and transgender athletes when we hadn't really gotten at some of the key stuff. And there's been a lot of back and forth. But what I really want to be clear about, and we can't do this, it's a workshop in and of itself. And over the last several months, I found there's people that are way ahead of me in terms of understanding this. There's people that disagree with it entirely. And there's people that are kind of overwhelmed with all that's going on in the world right now. But the thing I hope the people of Somersworth understand and the City Council understands is that the basic concept of universal public education, federal commitment to it, state commitment to it, overall national commitment to it, is what is at stake right now. And it was a conversation with my assistant superintendent, Kat Crosby, early in the summer. She said, there's several books about this right now, and I have a couple of them in front of me, and there's plenty that are out there. But this isn't your superintendent just sort of trying to get everybody worked up about this budget season. I desperately encourage you, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about and are interested in learning more and developing your own opinions about it, but there is deliberate, organized, strategic efforts at the federal level, at the state level, throughout this country to basically undo universal public education. And there's a piece of what vouchers is about. It's a piece of what underfunding is about. New Hampshire remains to be dead last by a far cry in terms of percentage of dollars, percentage of public school funding. Maine right now is struggling to keep their percentage at about 55%. We're down closer to 10%. There's no other state, Mississippi, North Dakota, Alabama, Utah, you name it, across the country that's anywhere close to what we see in New Hampshire in terms of the state's capacity. And that's obviously why we've been fighting in the courts for the last 30 years about that. but it is truly, truly at a critical juncture right now. And I hope to do my best to just, encourage Somersworth, the community, the counselors involved, that to me, this is kind of a potentially close to a last stand, and this is an opportunity for Somersworth to say no. We have to maintain this, and we have to fight harder for what universal public education really means. And I think this budget battle is going to be partly about that, as well as just kind of figuring out how to have a good year next year. I present that context. I'm happy to talk to anybody one-on-one in smaller groups, reference you to things you might want to read. And again, to me, this is not political. It's just about education. It's not about left versus right. But I'll tell you, there's not much disagreement on it because there's stuff that's being written very clearly at this point about taking universal public education down and really putting it as a responsibility, as a service that parents and families can choose on their own. But the commitment to kind of making sure that all kids in all communities, regardless of income, have a good public education, I think is what's at stake. That's a lot, and I know there's folks familiar with this, and I know there's folks that may not, and it may sound like superintendent rhetoric in a budget season, but it's real. You can have your own opinions about whether it makes sense or not, and what's deliberate and what's just collateral damage. But I hope we can keep that in mind, and I'm happy to talk more with folks about that. But I can't really do better than this in our budget workshop. Katie's going to talk a little bit more about revenues and expenditures, and if it makes sense, I can talk a little bit about the cuts that we're looking at, and then throw it wide open from there.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the handouts. I'm going to start on the first page and go over some revenues. I know we only have a short amount of time, so feel free to stop me, but you'll get way more detail when we present to you our full budget, but just for the essence of time, I'm just going to go right through them. So the top section is tuition. So there's two areas there that we budget for revenue: preschool tuition. We have 2 preschool classrooms at Idlehurst. This is for tuition we charge for our non-identified students. So we're required to provide services for students who are identified in special education. Those families don't get charged anything, but we do have to have a mix of both identified and non-identified. So this is tuition that we charge families to come to the program. We have increased in that area. We were looking, because we have a large loss of revenue down further that I'll go over, we were looking at all areas of revenue to see where we could increase our revenue projections to kind of offset what we are losing. Career Tech was another area. This is for students who attend our CTC programs from other districts. So we've increased that area too. So total tuition, we increased by $16,000. Under local sources, there's a big loss of revenue there for Rollinsford's SAU fee for services. I don't know how many of you are aware, but currently we provide services for the Rollinsford School District, SAU 104. The 5-year agreement is up with them come June 30th this year, and they have decided and notified our board that they are no longer going to continue those services. They're going to be their own SAU going forward. So there's a large loss of revenue that comes along with that, of $238,410. Building use fees, that remained the same at $4,000. That is for facility use. The majority of that is charged, received from Head Start for the classroom that they rent at Idlehurst. Under state revenue, the state of New Hampshire adequacy, we had a loss of $61,593. That's the money we've received from the state of New Hampshire. For building aid, there's a decrease of $17,658. This is for the Idlehurst School. Building aid used to be spread over a 20-year period, and each year it gets reduced. It's changed now, so when you get building aid, you get it up front, but this is for when Idlehurst was built. Special education aid, this is again is an area that we looked at to try to increase. We've seen an increase of amounts that we've been getting over the years. We've been conservative in what we budgeted there, but this year we felt we wanted to raise it up because we have seen more and gotten additional revenue in the current fiscal year. Career and Tech Center tuition aid, this is money we get from the state for our CTC program. And then other state aid is a decrease of $18,503. This is for the Education Freedom Account, so students who choose to leave our school district and go on the Education Freedom Account. This is a phase-out grant, so each year it gets phased out, so that's why you're seeing a decrease there. Under federal revenue, Medicaid revenue is another area we looked at. We've seen a little bit of an increase, so we tried again to adjust that to actuals. So we increased by $50,000, and then indirect cost revenue by $2,000. This is money we get from our federal grants to administer the grants. So right now, as this budget stands, we have a total revenue loss of $143,164. On the second page, I'll go over the expenditure summary. Again, we'll go into more detail, but this is just by category. So first in the budget were salary increases. The total for all collective bargaining agreements and staff total salary increases is $965,092. And I put on the bottom the percentages that each of the unions or different staff members are getting for increases. Medical insurance increases was 14.4%, which was a very large increase for our district this year. That total is $550,882 for all staff. The reason for that is due to usually we receive a premium holiday savings from our insurance company. If they have funds left over at the end of the year, we're required to return it. But because of the high claims cost, they don't have that savings in the premium holiday, so we're not getting that return. For dental insurance is a 5% increase, small increase, $4,347. For special education, this includes out-of-district placements, transportation, additional paraprofessionals based on IEPs, and contracted services for speech, OT, school psychologists. There's a total increase of $583,301. Each building, when they submitted their budgets to us, each had a little bit of an increase for supplies and increased costs. So that total for all the buildings was $22,412. Facilities also went through his budget and made adjustments where they were needed, $48,120. Athletics for both middle school and high school increased by $29,484. The majority of that is due to us now having to pay for an athletic trainer. We had gotten that for free for a number of years, and in the current fiscal year was the first year we've been starting to get charged for that service. And also there's money built in there for uniform replacement for the teams on a rotating basis. We're going to replace uniforms each year. Transportation contract, district-wide curriculum, $38,000. We're going to be piloting a new testing and curriculum program. I don't know if John and Kat want to add more to that, but that's $38,000. Transportation contracts, this is for our transportation contract with First Student. Our contract is up this year, and the increase for next year is 8.25%. So that's $39,797. We had built-in money in the SAU budget to replace the roof. The increase is $11,674. The total cost of the roof replacement is $35,000. However, we had in the current budget we had money to replace the boiler, so it's the difference between the two. Primex workers' comp and property liability insurance increased for a total of $20,026. Our school resource officer increase was $1,211, and then miscellaneous dues increased by $872. So those are the increases. We did see some savings within our budget. New Hampshire retirement rates went down for us. It's set every 2 years, so we had a total savings across the district, $67,142. Technology, there was a savings of $143,481. If you remember, in the fall, we came to the council and asked for a supplemental appropriation with our additional adequacy funds, and most of that was to fund phase 2 technology upgrades. So we can remove that from the budget next year because we're doing those upgrades in the current year. Debt service and performance leases was a decrease of $12,189. And then we had some retiree adjustments. When staff retires, we adjust their salary to like master's step 7 2-person plan because we're not sure who's going to replace them, and also some buyback savings. So there was a $66,140 savings. So as John mentioned, right now as the budget stands, we're an increase of just over $2 million for expenditures. So you can see on the top of page 3, just the summary right now, based on the tax cap number of an increase of the tax cap came in at $903,744 as a school portion. So right now we are 1.2 million over the tax cap above. And then John will take over from here and go over the bottom section regarding reductions.
Thank you, Katie. I just want to make sure if you stay on that second page for a second and the increase in expenditures, if you're so just to make sure it's rock solid in everybody's head why we're looking at needing about $2 million more to do what we're doing this year, next year. There's 3 line items that cover it all because we basically trimmed out everything else we possibly could. The salary increases are close to $1 million. And I know that sounds like a lot, and the collective bargaining agreements, but our teachers and our faculty and our paraeducators, it remains hard to fill all of our spots because we are not competitive with the highest paying districts in this area. So the phenomenal people that we keep just want to be in Somersworth, but we lose folks regularly. The medical increases in insurance, $550,000. That's the second of the 3 lines that is huge, and I know that everybody's getting hit with that. And the concern can sometimes be raised. Well, maybe we don't have the benefits that we have for our teachers and our paraeducators. But again, personnel is huge to a good quality education, and we have to remain competitive on salary, or as competitive as we can be on salary and benefits. And we're not at the top. We lose folks because of these. And the 4th line there, special education, rightly mandated to provide a good quality education for students that need special education services. Right there is $2 million in terms of understanding where we are. Nothing frivolous. In terms of prospective cuts, and looking at being short about $1.3 million on the 3rd page, Katie just covered the top, but I will just tell you briefly. You've got the first section there, the Tier 1 draft budget reductions totaling about $100,000. Yes, we can live with this, but this is stuff we need to do eventually. This is not people. This is materials and projects and other resources. The second tier takes close to $20,000 out of the athletics budget, and it also takes out 2 building aides and a paraprofessional and a half at the high school. I believe those positions belong in Tier 3, but I know that's unreasonable to put all the personnel in Tier 3. Building aides are critical at the elementary school level. Paraprofessionals are critical at all levels, and we continue to have trouble filling them. And then the bottom 3rd tier section, just to be real clear, this is the discussions we've had have been up to 1 teaching position at Idlehurst. And we just put a teaching position back in at the beginning of this year. 1 or 2 positions at Maplewood. You see 1 there, teaching position. A middle school special education case manager, a middle school teaching position, 1 entire CTC program, which is huge, 1 high school teaching position, 1 library media specialist. We're looking at facilities positions and hours, maybe part-time or reducing hours or reducing overtime in certain ways. And possibly up to 2 positions from a SAU office that is only 10 people is pretty significant as well. And maybe going back to where we were last year with special education, which would be brutal. And this would also entail not expecting someone to answer the phone when you call the central office, which some folks may say, yeah, that's an easy thing to do. I kind of really struggle with that. I certainly wouldn't want it to happen at the schools. And a school social worker that serves the entire district and has been in this role, contracted through Stratford Learning Center for 14 years. That one's huge as well. That gets us into the ballpark of the cuts that we would need to make with the expected revenues that we're looking at this time. The below the line stuff is all the creative things that Katie and all of us are looking at to try to minimize these losses without cuts, like using the fund balance revenue, or maybe moving from a model where we contract out our speech and language services to bringing 1 or 2 people in-house if we can find them, And I think that's kind of the big picture. And thanks, David.
Thank you. I guess a question or 2 maybe for the city manager. I don't know if he's prepared to answer it tonight. Proposed tax cap increase for the school department was $903,000. City side was slightly less than that. If we adopted a budget that was to the tax cap in both the city side and the school side, do you know sort of where we might be headed in terms of a projected tax rate increase just out of the gate there? No is the answer.
I know the school side, it was 47 cents on approximately 47.
Got it. So I think it's just helpful to the overall conversation because I know at least some counselors sort of have that as a bellwether about appetite for those sorts of things. So it was 47 cents just for the school side, right? So the city side would be slightly less than that. And then you have the county expenditure and you have the statewide school as well. So somewhere up near $1, over $1, somewhere in that area, just out of the gate. So at this point, do any school board members want to offer anything additional, or do any counselors want to sort of share what they might be thinking out of the gate here, or questions?
Thank you. And my question would be to either superintendent or to Katie. This whole thing where the state was supposed to come in and have some funding for kindergarten or preschool. Has the state met any obligations at this point up to when? So how I get it is this, is Keno, which is a big thing, was supposed to help out kindergartens and preschool. Does it directly or help it, or is that rolled into the education funding?
It was 18 cents for the city.
Keno and the New Hampshire lottery system funds about 4% of public education in New Hampshire. So we shouldn't rely on it very much for anything. It's rolled in, it just goes into the education trust fund on the state level and is dispersed through adequacy.
So 4% is not really a lot. So my question, I lost my thinking here, but so then the city is picking up a lot of it when the Keno was supposed to pick it up from the state. Did the Keno take over, once Keno went in, did it take over right away? Did it give to the cities and towns any money? Minimally. You said minimally?
Yeah. I can't stress enough, and I know this, the burden becomes significant. This is where the Claremont case began in the 1990s. The state of New Hampshire is so far dead last in contribution to public education funding in this country. We're 50th. Most states are somewhere around 50-50 to some degree or another, local property tax dollars and state contribution. So the state of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire advantage, and no general sales tax, no income tax, and about as small a government as you can have. The most affluent communities with the commercial and residential property tax bases can do what they can do, and those of us without that kind of property tax base are kind of left either to collapse or do what we can to fight this and fund our schools nonetheless.
And the reason for my questioning this was because it just goes to show you one more time that the state is inadequate for what they proposed for this whole Keno deal. And it downshifts the money onto the cities and towns, which is just not right. And it puts a lot of burden on cities and towns when the state said they were going to do one thing and did something different. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Counselor. I know over the last couple of budget cycles, the school department has requested a supplemental appropriation after passage of the budget when additional state revenue or federal revenue, I don't know which, was realized. And I think in both cases, the council agreed with the request and funded that supplemental appropriation. And if I recall correctly, that amount was based upon the fact that we received more revenue from the state than what was in the budget, because the budget is created in a very careful manner. It's very conservative other than realization. Is there any of that conservatism in the current budget as you've proposed it here?
We've budgeted 100% of what they've given us for the estimate for adequacy. They give us an estimate in September to build our budget. And then once the year end happens and the end of year data is collected, then they give us a revised estimate next November. And that's when we come usually for the supplemental if we get additional revenue. But in the past, we have gone down in and gone 95% of the estimate to be conservative, but it cuts too much from our expense side, so we've gone back to budgeting the full 100%.
Understood. Thank you. Further questions, comments? Councillor Goodwin, we'll go here. And then Marty after that.
Thank you. I had two questions. One is, with Rollinsford removing the services from the SCU level, I guess I'm curious on how much time did those services take up when we were providing those services? Clearly, they thought they were getting something out of it if they were paying $240,000 a year. And I'm just curious if, there's two positions on the tier 3 budget reductions, two SCU positions. I'm wondering, if one or both of those positions might just be an offset of time reduction that we lost to Rollinsford. That's one question.
Thank you. I'll give it back to you. That's a good question. I believe, looking at districts of similar size, that we are properly staffed as we are, probably missing a tech director, although we contract out for that. And I think we can eventually move to having an in-house tech director for the district. With 4 or 5 schools, counting the CT separately, I think that would be a good idea. So the two prospective cuts are not an offset to say now that we're scaling back. The Rollinsford, this is the 5th year of the agreement as we know it, because they moved to tuition their kids out, but it wasn't until 5 years ago, that was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we split districts. And that's when this agreement came into place. And the general assumption is 16% of our time. I think it's fair to say the assistant superintendent, Katie, and I basically work full-time for SAU 56 and do what we can above and beyond that to serve Rollinsford. And it's a stretch. It's kind of it's a disservice to them that they contract services in this way. And I believe SAU 56 and the Somersworth School District needs a full-time central office, full-time focused on Somersworth. So we're losing what would have been about $230,000 next year. We used last year's number to put in this year, but about $230,000 in lost revenue, which stinks. It's a fraction of a percentage point of overall budget, but that part hurts. But I believe it's in the better interest of us long-term to have a central office focused on Somersworth. It was their decision, though. The way the contract is written, they decide if they want to continue or move in a different direction. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
I guess what I'm, sorry.
I know. I guess what I'm getting at is that there's a 16% reduction in work. Right, but they left. Rollinsford said, we don't want this contract anymore. 16% of our staff time is now been freed up. So, purely in really cold-hearted business terms, I would anticipate a 16% approximate reduction in overhead, right? Because there's now a 16% reduction in time. So, and not just, I get what you're saying, and I want to provide top quality services, and I want a very robust SAU, and having it focused purely on Somersworth. I get the focus, I get what you're saying, but I'm just saying from a purely managerial math perspective, it's is that 16% just being absorbed into SAU 56, and we're not proposing any budget reduction there? That's the math I'm trying to figure out. Yeah.
I think it's a fair question. As it turns out, that it is reflected in what we're proposing, but I just want to stress it's not because we're adjusting downward. There was never any adjustment made in the direction upward when we went into this agreement. I think it was always assumed that we could kind of pull this off. And I'm of the opinion of the individuals that are working both for Rollinsford and for Somersworth, myself included, that basically you've got folks that are working full-time for Somersworth, and we're properly staffed for that do this extra above and beyond to bring in the revenue. But your point's is just as good a way to look at it as well. It's just not, I think if you look at districts of our size, you'll see we're about properly staffed.
Thank you. The other one is kind of a general thing, and I don't think it's going to be a panacea, but it is something I'm curious about. I know that demographically over time, student population has declined, and I'm just curious on how the district goes about projecting enrollment, adjusting for that decline over time. I've tried via conversations to try and get demographic data over a period of time because I'm just curious to see how much it's declined. I'm a product of Somersworth schools, and I remember the schools being significantly bigger as a millennial when I was there, right? So I'm I'm just curious because, I think just realistically, and I'm sure you guys are planning for this, it's just I don't have the transparency. It's, maybe there is a point in time that we need to plan for a decline in facilities or a decline in staff because the student population isn't there to support it. Notice I didn't say a decline in quality of education or services, but scaling back based on demographics. I'm just curious how the SEU goes about projecting that and planning that, and any sort of information on how you engage that information could be shared.
Quick answer if anybody wants to jump in. The last time we did a enrollment projection study, I think was 3 or 4 years ago, and it basically hire a group, educational consultants that focus on demographic trends that try to project outward. You need to pay a little bit more money than probably we did to kind of really get detailed analysis of folks moving in and birth rates and everything else in Somersworth. I hear both things about Somersworth, that we might be looking towards growing enrollment in the years ahead based on kind of how things are developing, or might not. But the bottom line is, over the past several years, we had a lot of leadership changes in the central office position, among others. We've been doing it a year at a time, and we're putting together a strategic plan that looks further out, and we want to get into the habit of doing budget planning that is always looking 3 to 5 years out on a rolling basis, including good, solid enrollment projections, and really knowing what's happening in terms of birth rates and pre-K population. But we need to do better. Carly.
I just wanted to add to that comment. I can provide analysis on enrollment in Somersworth over time if you'd like, and bring to the next city council meeting. But it's also another misconception, like the smaller our population of students gets, the worse the economy of scale becomes and the more expensive each student is. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind, that every year Somersworth sees an enrollment decline if they do, and we are already kind of adjusting for that every year, and we can't make our schools smaller and without tearing them down and rebuilding them.
My major question is that overall what you're proposing for a budget, what is the increase of the tax rate on what your proposed budget is, and what's over the tax cap, and what is it going to be evaluated per thousand also?
Is that a key?
You can't.
Marty's question was, if we funded the school budget in full, what would the projected tax rate increase be? Is that accurate? Right. We know that up to the tax cap was 47 cents. We heard that about. Right.
Got it, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is maybe a good time to kind of like think about what we're thinking about to encompass like the whole community, because when I see this and it's communicated out, we are cutting 14 positions. I'm like, what is that going to do to the city of Somersworth as it is, to people looking to move here, to say they cut a trades program, they cut this? Like, we want to have folks moving here to come to our schools and live here for a long time. And so part of the reason in our workshop that one of our reductions is our social worker, which is a tough one because we need it. A potential solution for the return of investment for the entire community is potentially to share that cost, to have a social worker in the city and have a shared, a shared person like Rochester and Dover has. So one of those things as well. Like, we can be creative in how we approach this, but because it will, if we completely keep at this, 1.3 million, and we don't make some adjustments or add in some, we won't have a school. We'll have a school that we've never, with the least amount of supports that we've ever seen. So.
I'll take a couple of quick comments here. The mayor did provide to me, and I'll pass this out to counselors, and I think enough for school board members as well, sort of a draft letter to the governor in the general court, just again stating our position on state adequacy aid. This seems to be an annual rite of passage. It's been updated with some more current numbers, if you will. I'll be frank, I'm not sure anybody in Concord reads these. They certainly don't take action on them, but we should continue to try, right? We need to beat the drum. So I'll pass that out momentarily. From a budget perspective, I think everybody in this room knows, and those watching at home, that I have, when needed, supported an override of the tax cap here in the city. And I think we've done it 3 or 4 times. It's not been done every year. It's been done rather strategically, in my view. And we did override last year in a very strategic and appropriate manner, in my humble opinion. Although, never say never, I think the conversation this year is just more difficult. And I base that off of the fact that we went through a revaluation as required by the state. And I think we all know that those revaluations hit certain sectors of our community harder than others. Those that live in manufactured housing, mobile homes, saw rather steep increases, condo units, things of that nature. Personally, my taxes went up a little bit, but not much, stayed about the same, right? So it affected different people differently. But I think a lot of the people that saw sharp increases are folks that are going to struggle to meet their tax cap obligation, never mind an obligation above the tax cap. So that's just the struggle that I'm going to have this year. And again, I'll never say never, and I'm going to be very open to the conversations. And what the desire of council is. I think one of the things that I'll certainly be asking of city staff, our finance director, is our fund balance and how healthy that is. Can we leverage that in any meaningful way? The difficulty with that is that if you take money out of the fund balance, ideally, you'd like to put that money back in at some point in time. You can't take money out of the piggy bank year after year because eventually it is empty, right? So it's just not a sustainable strategy in my book. We already use it rather significantly to offset the tax rate. It's a practice that we've gotten into here in the city. So taxpayers do see relief with the money that is saved in fund balance. We generally view that as money that's there for emergencies. Could we classify this as an emergency? Depends on the person, I suppose. But that's at least an area that I'd be looking at, maybe as opposed to an override, or maybe it's a little of both. I don't know.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add, from getting phone calls from my constituents, it's almost half the city has gone up. Extraordinary. It's extreme. And one of my examples of this is that one of the constituents that called me up, typically on a year where we do $1 or more, they were paying probably a $500 to $600 increase. This time around, with the reval, it was $1,700. So when you take $1,700, that's a 3-year increase, basically. But because of the reval, it was a one-time hit of $1,700. So these are some of the things, just to re-elaborate what Councilor Witham was saying, that it gets to the point where I used to say, when is enough enough? But now it's like, I don't say that, or when is it going to stop? It's not going to ever stop, but we try to ease the burden. With that, it was just, I just wanted to share that with some of my constituents, how they're feeling. And I know that I think they have plans on showing up during some of the budget things, like as in Rochester. Thank you.
I live in Sherwood Glen, okay, and I've talked to some of the people in that area. I know myself, my tax bill doubled from the previous year. We're talking almost $1,400. Okay, I can pay that. I'm not going to be kicked out of my home because of that tax bill. But I could probably list 50% of the people in Sherwood Glen that just meeting the increase of the present tax bill, the city manager and the tax assessor's office are going to be very busy, because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be not able to pay what they're looking at. the reassessment really did no favor for low-income individuals in this city. And there are a lot of them. And I believe in education. I spent 14 years on the school board, and I tried to support the budgets every year there. Being on the council now, I have a different perspective. I would have a very hard sell talking over and above what they're paying this year, paying another $1 plus more onto their tax bill. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe it's time for another major lawsuit. Maybe Somersworth should have one.
Thank you. You keep passing this down. Well said. I too don't have the answers, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things. And I attended the workshop over the weekend with the school board just to better understand everything that's happening. And a couple things that really struck me is a 6% increase in the overall budget compared to the increases that everyone is seeing right now with inflation, cost of goods. I know a lot of things just went up an additional 25% today. But keeping it at just a 6% increase is pretty good. I also want to make sure that people saw on the previous line that the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and the business administrator, Katie, have opted to take no increase this year, which is, thank you. It's something that I wish you didn't have to do, but the other increases are based on contracts. So there's not really anything you can do other than cut people because, as it was pointed out, there's a lot of professions that sometimes they start at much higher salaries. They sometimes get bonuses, but teachers really rely on that little bit of cost of living adjustment every year. I like some of the creative ideas I've heard. The social worker sharing the cost with the city. I thought back to our conversation around ACERT and how funding the adverse childhood experiences response team social worker type position with the police was part of going upstream and really preventing problems that, if they get caught early enough, will save us money down the line. And hopefully that's what something like a social worker would do, is save costs on the city side from our first responders, sort of a pre-first response. And there also were talks around, I think all of what everybody is saying, which is the state needs to do more. Somebody also shared on Saturday that, just a small anecdote from another city who has a very, very different population and tax base and size of community, that was talking about their naturalist that they contract and come in. And it was just like one little thing about, they have all of these different positions. Their class sizes are super small, and they have all these extra very cool things that we wish we could have. And we're looking at 17 and a half people listed on the sheet that we may have to reduce. So it's such a huge gap. And I think the education of where the money comes from, the amount that the cities, us, the taxpayers, people who are struggling already have to cover. I hope that education increases and that the pressure on the state increases. One thing that was brought up too is that the more families that apply for the free and reduced lunch, that generates, I think it was said, if 50 more families signed up for that, which I'm sure that we have, people who just haven't signed up who qualify would bring in $100,000. And that's not something that would change this budget. But again, these are things that I think the more that we educate and come up with these creative ideas, hopefully we'll get moving in that direction. And hopefully the lawsuits will get, settled in the right direction where the state will actually come up to adequate.
I don't want to cut anybody short. We do have a regular council meeting at 7, so just be mindful.
Just one thing is I had a council member. I didn't say how many years I've been on the city council. It's been over 20 years, so I don't dare say that. But one council member that I used to be here used to say, "I'm not going to vote anything over $1 per tax, over the tax rate. So we might just well close City Hall, and just send the police department away and the fire department away or whatever." I believe in education. I don't know. I haven't even seen the city side just yet. I know public safety is going up already because we've got an announcement for tonight for that. And I just don't know. You say 6% here. I don't know what the percentage is going to be on the city side. So I hope you realize that it's a double-edged sword for us. We receive the phone calls. I don't know how many phone calls you people receive, but with the tax evaluation and everything else going up, this is going to be a very, very hard sell. And I hope you realize it. It's not that I'm not for education. I sure am. My wife's served on the school board, so I know a lot about the school board as far as that's concerned. But I'm having a hard time with this number right now. So just to give you a heads up.
Maybe a statement of the obvious, but I'll point out that just salary increases per contract are over $900,000. That's in excess of the tax cap just by itself. And the city council, I believe in each and every case, unanimously agreed to those contracts. So I feel at least partially responsible there in a good way. Someone had a hand up.
So I find it's interesting. It's my 4th time here doing this budget, and I'm always so thankful. No one likes this time of year, right? No one likes this, right? Yeah, right. Okay, we all the same. But I always think it's so amazing how we all come together and we all have like similar mindset. We want what's best for the community. We want what's best for Somersworth. And I am always like, oh, like the perspective on both sides is reassuring and comforting. And I have no doubt that we'll come to some kind of agreement. But I just want to like remind everyone, this is just to stay the course of what we're doing, like nothing fancy, nothing else added. This is just pretty much at bottom of the barrel, like maintaining what we do have. It's not great, right? But I appreciate all of your time.
Going once, going twice. So again, for those watching at home, this is very early in the process. There are many more meetings, many opportunities to reach out to school board members, city councilors, staff in the school department, staff on the city side. We value your opinions. I think we can all collectively say we don't hear enough opinions, and that will help to guide our decision. We welcome donations, sure, small, big, sponsorships, whatever. So with that, we do have a regular council meeting at 7, and this will conclude the workshop. Thank you.